وكذلك أوحينا إليك روحا من أمرنا ما كنت تدري ما الكتاب ولا الإيمان ولكن جعلناه نورا نهدي به من نشاء من عبادنا وإنك لتهدي إلى صراط مستقيم صراط الله الذي له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض ألا إلى الله تصير الأمور.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of the program Muslims in America. The religion of Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world, and the majority of that growth is taking place right here in the United States of America. According to most reliable estimates, there are more than 7 million Muslims living in the USA. Muslims have become valuable and vital assets to the American society. So please join me as I travel around America to introduce you to a few of the many Muslims in America. And welcome back to the program, Muslims in America. Today we're in New York City, and we're at the 96th Street Masjid, known as the Islamic Cultural Center of New York City, and which is one of the oldest masjids here in New York City. And I'm here with the Imam of the Islamic Cultural Center of New York, Imam Omar Salim Abu Namus. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And I thank you very much, Sheikh, for sitting with us and spending some time with us.
You are so welcome.
Alhamdulillah. Sheikh, tell us a bit about yourself and your background and how you came to be the Imam of this masjid.
I was born in Palestine, and in 1948 I was about 13 years old when we left our country because of the events that took place at that time. And I left, for Gaza Strip, where I studied my secondary stage, then to Egypt, then back to Gaza also, where I worked as a teacher, then to Kuwait, where I stayed for 21 years. Then I came to the United Nations to work as a translator and reviser. Parallel to my work at the United Nations, I was also working as an Imam at large for about 18 years, from 1980 until 1998. Yes. In 1995, I retired from the United Nations, and then I worked for 3 years as freelance translator, and then I came to this center to become assistant imam for 3 years, and then imam as of the 1st of November 2001. I became imam until now.
MashaAllah.
Yes.
So Imam, this program is about Muslims in America, but also we're trying to get into the history of Islam in America. So just tell us a bit about what you know about the development of Islam in this area among the immigrant and indigenous populations.
Yes. Well, I think, Islam is better understood nowadays than it was before. A few years back, Islam was looked at as something alien, something extraneous out of the country that came to the United States, and Muslim practices were looked at as something strange. For example, when people saw a Muslim woman with a headscarf, they would look at her as a strange phenomenon, in their country, and many of them would make fun, of that phenomenon. But after 9/11, the Americans were more serious to understand al-Islam. So they started to study about al-Islam and to attend lectures about al-Islam. And even in in secondary schools and in colleges, in universities. Now, courses about Al-Islam are being taught to the students. So that the students have now a fairly good background about Al-Islam. Those students who study about Al-Islam in their educational institutions, they come here to our center in order to see Al-Islam, on the spot. So they come here in order to see the mosque for themselves and in order to ask questions about Al-Islam and to listen to clarifications and explanations about Al-Islam. And indeed, there is good acceptance, good reception for Al-Islam, as I notice, the visitors, they listen attentively and many of them are pleased with what they hear.
Now, Imam, you mentioned 9/11, and this is the biggest mosque in New York City.
Yes.
So talk a bit about what went on at that time at 9/11 and your involvement in trying to really calm things down and let people understand that this unfortunate thing had nothing to do with Islam.
Yes. Well, 9/11 indeed was a turning point in the history of Muslims here in the United States, because little attention was given to Muslims before 9/11. Muslims, did not interfere in politics, for example, and their presence in economic and financial life was barely felt, in this country. This is a big and wealthy country, and so a small Muslim community in the United States is not very much prominent, among a big population of about 300 million people. But when 9/11 took place, it was a shock to everybody, a shock to the Americans and equally to the Muslims themselves, who were taken, aback by what happened, that Muslims had done, that tragedy, to this country. And of course they expected the worst to happen here. Indeed, there was a hard time for Muslims here. Some Muslims were killed, others were beaten, and many Muslims lost their jobs, and Muslim women were abused verbally in the streets, for example. And it was difficult for a Muslim woman or a Muslim man whose name was, Islamic, like Ahmad, Muhammad, Mahmoud, or, Khalid. These names are easily identified as Islamic names, and therefore people with these names found difficulty finding jobs, in the country. Therefore, some Muslims had to change their names from Muhammad, for example, to Mike or something like that, in order to conceal their real identity and to be better accepted, in their milieu, in their place of work, for example, and in the community. But, in order to be fair to the authorities of this country, the authorities, told the people, the American people, that Muslims in this country are not to blame for what happened, and therefore nobody should lay any blame or reproach on them because of what happened. They are innocent, they had no finger in what took place, and therefore they should not be held responsible, for what happened. And police precincts, used to organize patrols, around our center here and around Muslim schools, other Muslim centers and mosques, in order to make sure that there were no attacks, no attacks on these institutions. So indeed, at least at this place here, this center, which is a big one and frequented by so many Muslims here, we had no event, no negative event happening to anyone here. No worshipper, for example, no Muslim here was exposed to any bad attack, for example, or any abuse or insult.
Okay, Imam, that was a tragic event, 9/11. But were there any good aspects, any good outcomes for giving a better understanding about Islam for Muslims?
It was a mixed blessing in point of fact. Blessing in what sense? In that the Americans were shocked and they decided they must understand something about al-Islam. So all of a sudden there was a rush, on Islamic bookshops, on Islamic centers. And there were a lot of invitations to Muslim imams, Muslim speakers and lecturers to go to colleges and universities and other places in order to give lectures, in order to answer questions about al-Islam. So all of a sudden, Muslim bookshops were empty, All the books were sold out. And of course, even the Holy Quran copies, also went out. And this meant that the American population was thirsty, wanting to understand everything about this religion to which they gave little attention before. So this was, one of the positive aspects, of 9/11. Another positive aspect is that so many Muslims received invitations, to go to participate in panels, for example, and to be speakers and so on. So there was a lot of familiarity. Muslims became familiar, in the environment of this country. And we had the opportunity, of course, to speak positively about al-Islam, that those who perpetrated that tragedy indeed had no relationship with al-Islam at all. And they did it just out in order to take revenge, maybe, on the government of the United States. And therefore, that attack had nothing to do whatsoever, with al-Islam. Al-Islam is innocent. It is a religion of peace, no less than Judaism and Christianity and any other peaceful religion, And of course, we explained many of the ideals, teachings of al-Islam in order to make them understand what al-Islam stands for. That they should not look at al-Islam as something to be feared or something frightening or something, that poses danger, for example, to the country. On the contrary, it is a positive element, in the constitution of this country. And it will, with time, it will contribute, many things in the life of this country.
We're here in New York City, near the famous 96th Street Masjid. And the growth of Islam has spurred a lot of things in America, and that's the availability of halal food. We have plenty of halal meat markets and restaurants, and that has even translated to having halal food vendors on the street. Alhamdulillah, we find here in New York, maybe there are 200 or 300 halal food vendors on the street, and they sell things like chicken and rice, and shish kebab, and gyros, and falafel, and many things which are attractive to Muslims and non-Muslims alike. We find that a lot of non-Muslim people enjoy and seek out these halal food stands because they feel that there's something more clean and pure about the food of the Muslims. So alhamdulillah, that this is the indicator of the growth of Islam in America, that we can find some such places to find halal food on the street. So inshallah, I hope that our viewers understand that Islam is really growing in America, and the necessities of halal food are being met, and you can even find halal food on the streets of New York. Alhamdulillah. Imam, as we travel around the country, we hear from everyone that Islam is the fastest growing religion in America.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about here at the center. Have you seen many people coming to Islam?
Yes. Indeed, there is one aspect in the Muslim nation which is absent in other communities which follow other religions. In other communities following other religions, the da'wah, what we call da'wah, that is the call to the religion or proselytizing, is done only by the professionals or by the priests of that religion. In Islam, it is not done by the priests. It is more done by ordinary people, you know, by workers, by employees, by any Muslim, you know, in the street. He will start talking about religion. And therefore, many people who came to Al-Islam, who adopted Al-Islam, they adopted it as a result, for example, of a conversation which they had with a taxi driver, or which they had with a restaurant waiter, for example, or with a cook, or with a worker, or whatever, you know. So ordinary Muslims, you know, because they pray 5 times a day and they know a lot about Islam. So they talk about Al-Islam to those with whom they come into contact, you know. So they talk about Al-Islam, and so many people, you know, of those non-Muslims are influenced positively. And after a few weeks, they come to the mosque in order to declare, you know, their adoption of Al-Islam. So this is one aspect why Al-Islam is so very fast spreading. And also because the Muslim nation, you know, is more committed to Al-Islam than other communities to their religions. For example, take for example the Christians or the Jews. A very small minority are, you know, in those communities are committed to their religions, for example, or observe, for example, the teachings and principles of their religion. The situation with Muslims is very different. We have, for example, on Fridays, we have thousands of people coming to observe the Friday prayer. We have a month-long celebrations, you know, of fasting, Ramadan. Every night we celebrate, we have lectures, we have prayers, we have chanting, we have so many things during Ramadan. So this kind of commitment by Muslims to their religion, you know, cannot, you know, does not fail to affect and influence other communities when they see that how Muslims, you know, are good people, peaceful people, and they are positive in every way. So this, of course, brings people, you know, to the fold of Islam.
Imam, everywhere we go, we're told and understand that Islam is the fastest growing religion in America, and the majority of those accepting Islam are women. So just tell us a bit about what you've heard from women, about what are the key components of Islam which attract them to the religion.
Yes, because so many women, you know, from other communities turn to Al-Islam because they discover that women in Islam, you know, contrary to the bad reputation that some people try to spread against Al-Islam, saying that women in Al-Islam are badly treated, for example, or are oppressed and something, things like these. Women discover that the religion which respects women most is Al-Islam. Yes, and that the scarf, for example, which Muslim women wear is not in fact a sign of oppression. Muslim women themselves insist on that scarf as a response to the call of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Allah, you know, Allah has a command in the Holy Quran that women must be modest and must not brandish or display their charms and their beauties in order for the society to be chaste and to be pure. And that's why Muslim women, you know, of other communities discover that propaganda against al-Islam is not true in point of fact. That Muslim women are respected and are pure women, and they are dedicated to their religion and dedicated to their families. Unlike, you know, other communities where you find women, for example, undedicated, and they leave their families, for example, they leave their husbands. So that kind of unorganized life, you know, of course many of them got fed up with it, and they turned to al-Islam as a result.